I want to say burn notice, but I can't say burn notice because it's not exactly a burn notice moment, but it is a moment of a Bernie bump. So in the state polls, let's say Bernie gets a bump, Biden stalls. Let's talk about it. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas, and this is indeed the Progressive Soapbox. And I gotta be honest, I wasn't sure if this was gonna work. For the last 3 hours or so, I've been trying to get my system to work. I've had 3 updates. I've had a system update, I've had an OBS update, 2 updates. And I wasn't quite sure which one was the error, but one started, or YouTube. I was even thinking maybe YouTube had finally taken my channel down with the ad apocalypse stuff. But it ended up, I had to run it in, what is it called, normal mode or something like that, or compatibility mode in order to get it to work. So, nevertheless, I am here. Let's do the news. And in this particular case, I want to talk about some of the polling that's recently come out. Again, I take polling with a grain of salt this far out, especially when you get to the debates and those type of things, I think it starts to crystallize a bit more, and you get to be a little bit more accurate within regards to what the public thinks, because I don't even think the public knows what the public thinks. With the exception of a few people, Sanders supporters haven't gone anywhere from the previous election. They have more choices now, so some of those people may be peeling off, but for the most part, his core supporters are still there, and they're motivated. Biden has a lot of support among the elderly. That's not a slur. I say that in the most literal sense of the word. People have seen Biden. I think they like Joe Biden for the same reason people of my generation like Shaq or Lou Rawls. Not my generation in this case. Or my mom likes Tom Jones. If she sees Tom Jones today, Tom Jones still look like the 20-year-old guy with women throwing their underwear on stage. It's a familiarity associated with people that you've known for God knows how long. The catch becomes, what happens when you go through one debate after the next, after the next, after the next, after the next, after the next? Do that, 20 times? How many ever debates they're having? And the 40 years of your political records get dredged out. Your support for just overt racists. In some cases, supporting policies that was detrimental to a population that you are going to need to get you in that office. I have made the point that I think Biden is going to flame out. I do not think Biden is the biggest threat in this race, at least from the standpoint of Sanders. I think Elizabeth Warren is. I think Warren has positioned herself to be the corporate candidate, and I think these polls bear that out, not to mention the coverage she's been getting on MSNBC and CNN. She has been one of the most opportunistic politicians that I've come across, and I know people hate me saying that, but I think that's somewhat true. The woman tried to call herself a Native American to get the opportunity, and I don't necessarily begrudge her for that, because I don't necessarily think that initially started off as being completely political. It became political when she started getting in a back and forth over it. She's going to be ribbed remorselessly as Pocahontas for the rest of her life because of Donald Trump in this case, and because of some of her own bad decisions on this. But the Standing Rock stuff, the not supporting Sanders stuff, and I understand you're in a political arena, so there are certain consequences of being in the political arena. By the same token, there are certain consequences for taking those choices. And one of those consequences is I distrust you immensely. The reparations stuff, she doesn't really intend to give reparations. That's not real, but it didn't stop her from raising her hand saying, yes, I'm willing to do that. Anything that came up that it gave her the opportunity to get her name in the conversation, she raised her hand for. Then you could say that's what she's supposed to do. She's being a politician. Fair enough. Fair enough. As long as you admit that that's what's been taking place. All right, so who's leading the Democratic primary? Now, Joe Biden, in the overall voting of things, and I want to look at this in 3 ways. One for the states, or one for national, one for states, but also one for the secondary choice. Like, if your person flames out, who would you vote for? Meaning, who would get their support if one person leaves the race and this race started to narrow? So, on a national level, things haven't necessarily changed all that much. Joe Biden has dropped a point. Joe Biden has dropped a point. Elizabeth Warren has gained a point, has gone up to 11%. Sanders, stable. when you get to the state races, and the state races are the most important because ultimately, this is not a national election. It is, but it's won state by state by state by state, not necessarily just based on the national vote. So Joe Biden, -1%. Sanders gains 3. In fact, that's the biggest gain in the entirety of the competition. And he has been fighting hard in South Carolina and Iowa, fighting hard for each and every one of those percents. Showing up at, did you see him at the McDonald's thing the other day? I mean, he's all over the place. He is working hard for these votes. That's a man who wants it. Elizabeth Warren drops 2. Pete Buttigieg and Kamala Harris gain 1. So it hasn't been a huge move for the people, but Bernie Sanders gets, at least among the people who are in the race, a significant bump. This is the interesting part. Last, who would you vote for if your person flamed out? Who was your second choice? So for Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders is his second choice. Isn't that fascinating? 30% of the people wanted Sanders as their second choice. 14% wanted Kamala Harris. 12% wanted Warren. All right. Which means, by the way, that among the people that are voting for Joe Biden, many of those people are not adverse to voting for Bernie Sanders. Those people would be perfectly willing to vote for one Mr. Bernie Sanders, which questions why are they voting for Joe Biden? Is it the electability argument? The people couldn't be more different. Here's another one. For Bernie Sanders, that person is Joe Biden. It's the same conversation. 20% Warren, 7% Harris. Now, when you get to Elizabeth Warren, it goes immediately to Kamala Harris. Look at that. And then for Harris, it goes immediately, to Joe Biden, then Elizabeth Warren. But Elizabeth Warren is like 21%. It's close. What they were saying were that these two were feeding off of one another. Meaning, if one bites it, the other one may most likely get their votes, particularly one Kamala Harris, who's the kind of stalking horse in this process. Favorability and so forth hasn't really changed all that much. I mean, somehow Joe Biden has become more favorable than one Bernie Sanders, but I suppose Bernie Sanders has been campaigning hard for the last, 4 or 5 years, not to mention the Democrats, I believe he had the temerity to run against Hillary Clinton. So I would imagine maybe that takes a ding out of him to some degree. Elizabeth Warren, 24%. Kamala Harris, 22%. These two are right there beside one another. The interesting part of these. But again, these numbers, I think these numbers are fluid. And not just these numbers, to some degree. I don't think Sanders' numbers are fluid. I don't even think Biden's numbers are No, I think Biden's numbers are fluid. Honestly, and knock me on this if I'm wrong. It's prognostication, so take it with a grain of salt. I think Warren is the threat here. I still think Biden is going to flame out, which leads Warren, but I think Warren is going to have a hard time beating Trump. And it's not because she's a woman per se. It's the dynamics. It's the way it lines up. It's the optics. It's like when Richard Nixon was having a debate with John F. Kennedy, and people looked at the debate, and people who just heard the debate thought Nixon won it. People who watched the debate thought Kennedy won it. Optics matter. It's politics. It's not about what's right. It's not about even what's the best. It's about just who wins using whatever hook or by crook. All right, I'm not going to keep this one all that long. I just thought this was I try to keep up to date on what's taking place from the standpoint of the polling trends. Warren, Republican pass will not look good. See, I don't think that's going to bother her. And the reason why is because it's her Republican past. And she can say, look, I evolved. People evolve. I evolved. Like, if I look at what I was politically, just going back, let's say 8 years ago, I am a drastically different political character than I was back then. Not drastic. I wasn't a Republican. But I didn't have necessarily a political tenor. I mean, I voted for Ralph Nader, so to some degree, even on a subconscious level, that gives you my politics. But it wasn't active. Like, it wasn't assertive. It was just kind of this kind of passive, yeah, I think we should treat people nice. I don't think we should be out there bombing and killing, etc., etc. Let's see. And you have no idea how freaked out I was when I could not get this thing working. And I was like, all right, well, I'll just do my videos and push. It's not unusual. It's not unusual to get screwed by Democrats. It's not unusual to see that Wall Street cash. And it's not, and when they're voting against Medicare for all, it's not unusual to see the base cry, I want to die. I love the fact that you knew that. I love the fact that you know that. Tom Jones, that's one of Tom Jones' songs. It's not unusual to be loved by anyone, etc., etc. I actually like Tom Jones. I like Tom Jones. It's not unusual to get screwed by Democrats. It's not unusual to see that Wall Street cash. It's not unusual when they're voting against Medicare for all. And it's not unusual to see their base cry, I want to die. You ready for Warren to throw her support behind Harris and Biden for cabinet positions that will never ever come to pass? Oh, that's brutal. That's brutal. But I have to be honest. I have qualms about Warren. Do not misunderstand me. I don't hate her economic programs. When I hear Warren talk about domestic policy, I like what she's saying for the most part. I think she means it. Like, from the standpoint of what she wants to accomplish. If I think she's, to some degree, earnest, I think she's just a malleable political figure, which makes me somewhat distrustful. And I have no idea what her militaristic policies are. And the last thing that I've seen, back in, 2014, she was this kind of hawk for Israel. So that makes me somewhat dicey about her. I don't know how you can maintain the current military structure while simultaneously saying you're going to do something about the domestic side. And so you can promise anything that you want. It's very possible. The question is, does it drill down into you? And are you, I don't want to say an unshapable factor, but are you somewhat relentless in your pursuit for that stuff? I gotta be honest, I don't think that's Warren. I do think that all things being equal, if Warren can get away with it, she would just sucker punch bankers. Not even sucker punch, she would do it in the open. So, like I said, I do believe that she believes that stuff. But I look at this race and I say, well, there's one guy in the race that has been doing this for like 40-something years. The guy calls himself a socialist. And he clearly believes it. He clearly gets up in the morning and digs in him. Warren has already said that she's going to take campaign cash after the primaries. Essentially, I got you suckers. You thought I was going to run this race without taking cash. Sorry. False. Wrong. Yeah. So, between the people in the race, one person promising whatever anybody wants to hear, and the other guy has been, for the most part, principled on various positions going back for the last 40 years. I take that guy. I'll take that guy. I'll take that guy 1,000 times. I'll take that guy. I mean, come on. But MSNBC is boosting Warren like nobody's business, which is why I think she's the corporate candidate. I honestly do. And it's not that I think, I think she wants to push forth the wealth tax. I think the thing with Warren and her domestic policies is it's somewhat of a compromise. It's a deal. It's the wealth of the Democratic Party saying, look, things have gone too far to the right. We'll give you Warren. She's a capitalist. She's not really going to change the system per se. She may add in certain regulations, but we had those regulations added once before when the system got out of whack and we clawed it back. No harm. No foul. We'll take Warren. Especially between Sanders and Warren, we'll take Warren. It's the Martin Luther King, Malcolm X argument. It's like one guy is calling for peace and someone being a peacenik and the other guy's calling for revolution. I'll take the guy that's peacenik, thank you very much. One incentivizes the other. But we'll see. I could be wrong on this. And I hope God knows I hope I'm wrong on this. But I do think she's the biggest threat to Sanders. Balthazar. Warren evolved from a spineless worm who then... What? Alright, let me try this again. Pop reality. Once the candidate fall out, Bernie will be the clear frontrunner. Yes, Bernie will get those that open their eyes to Biden's flaws. Pop reality, I agree with you on this. But again, I strongly My concern in Biden is immediate. My concern about Biden is not long term, if that makes sense. And in looking at in the immediate, it's not that I think Biden can't necessarily. I mean, it's impossible. I just think more like it's going to flame out. The reason why I say Warren is because Biden creates a clear contrast to Sanders. Warren doesn't. And people who don't fully necessarily pay attention to politics may not necessarily be able to see the differences between the two things. Balthazar, Warren evolved from a spineless worm who was progressive when it didn't matter to a spineless jellyfish who's progressive when it does matter. Fair enough, but I don't know, Balthazar. I don't... I think she does mean the wealth stuff. I think she means the domestic stuff. I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong. But she seems to be pretty consistent on the domestic stuff. She's not a progressive candidate. They're boosting her to split the progressive vote. That I believe. But I don't think it's just to split the progressive vote. I think it literally is Warren is our person. I could be wrong. I could totally be wrong. And I think you're right. Don't get me wrong. It's no loss in splitting the progressive vote. You don't want the guy to win in the first place. And if you can stop Warren, then you can stop Warren. You kill two birds with one stone. If you're looking at this from the standpoint of a lefty versus somebody who is not, it's somewhat of an established pick. As an established pick, you're perfectly okay with Warren being in the race, whether she splits the vote or whether she takes it away from Sanders. I mean, like I said, I don't think Warren is that odious to the corporate class. I just don't. She's not changing anything. She's just making a few tweaks around the edges of sorts. It was clawed back once. It could be clawed back again. Why do you need a new deal? Why do you need a new deal? Bernie needs to make himself the FDR Democrat. He is making himself the FDR Democrat. And by the way, not just that. If you know, Sanders tomorrow night is going to do this big thing about democratic socialism. Is that tomorrow night or is that tonight? Am I getting that backwards? I thought that was tomorrow night. But he was going to do this major speech about democratic socialism, stepping into the title. If you guys want to have this fight on socialism versus, let's have this fight. George Galloway said one time, if you run, they'll chase you for the rest of your life. I agree with that. I think he's right on that. I think he's right. And I suspect Sanders, to some degree, seems to be agreeing with him, seeing that he's stepping into this particular conversation and he's having his major speech on that very specific issue. In a major speech tomorrow outlining his beliefs in democratic socialism, Bernie Sanders will draw distinction with real Donald Trump by labeling the president a corporate socialist. Understand why he's saying that. You're perfectly okay with giving tax cuts to companies that don't necessarily need it, who don't pay their workers all that well, taking away health care from these various people. His point is, it's one thing to have socialism for people who are at the bottom. It's another thing to do these favors to people who are at the top. And you tend to like this notion of doing this socialism for weapons contractors, like giving all these weapons to Saudi Arabia and essentially in boosting the military budget. And by the way, that's not just Trump, though. I mean, this distinction that he's creating between himself and Trump is not just between himself as Trump. It's him and both parties. Understand what I'm saying? It's him and both parties. He can't say that. He won't say that. Part of me wish he would say that. He only kind of gently hits that part. Take risks, make mistakes, get messy. And Mrs. Frizzle said, make mistakes, get messy. Who is Mrs. Frizzle? Bernie needs to rebuke the Democrats. Tulsi needs to advocate for cutting the military budget in half, not just against regime change, to get my vote. Man, I love that the funny part is, I hadn't seen that you said that before I said what I said about Sanders needs to rebuke both. Because ultimately, that's what he's talking about if he's making this case about democratic socialism. Balthazar, I could not agree with you more, man. Catch becomes, if you do that, how do you get through the primaries? Right? And the goal is to win. The goal is not to come in second. The goal is to win. How do you say that and get through the primaries? Now, you could say that and get into the office, but you have to do that after you get through the primaries. You can talk all the shit you want after you're running away. But you don't necessarily want to do that while you're in the middle of the contest, and you need those people to get you, at the very least, through the primaries. A process, by the way, where you were cheated ruthlessly last time around. Balthazar, I hear you, man. From this position, I hear you. From this position, I totally hear you. If I was in Sanders' campaign, not so much. All right. I'm going to end this because I got to be honest, this video wasn't meant to be long, and I have to be very honest. I didn't even think this video would play because, like I said, for the last 2 hours, nothing. Today was a clinic visit. I am dead tired. So even though I have like 3 or 2 other videos that I definitely wanted to do, I may push this until tomorrow morning. So if I don't see you guys later for next 10 minutes or so, I'll see you in the morning. Thanks all. If you enjoy what I'm putting down, please consider supporting this content through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks all. And please like, share. I try to vary that because I think if you say the same thing every time, it kind of just bleeds into the background. So my thought is if you vary the way you go with it, people actually hear it. But please like, please share, etc., etc. Thanks all. Unless you're sure... okay. Unless you're sure you'll get screwed. Hashtag third party. Moni G, back at you. Moni G, back at you. All right, guys. Bye-bye.